Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Mari Chen, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, we are continuing with the reading of Stars of Chaos, Volume 3, also known as Sha Polang by Priest. And we are beginning Arc 9, Western Campaign. Now, I have to say, this arc covers a big chunk of the book. I'm talking like 178 pages and 13 chapters. So obviously we won't be able to keep this arc together like we did with arc 8. I am going to split it into approximately 4 parts. So yeah. Anyway, let's just go ahead and get right into it. I really hope you guys enjoy. Arc 9, Western Campaign. Chapter 68, Poisoned. Guyuan sat upright on the back of his horse. He's still there? Shunyi lifted the field scope and turned to look back. Yes. Guyuan left the capital on a rare, clear day, the sun shining brightly overhead. The long-gone emperor had led a contingent of court officials beyond the city gate to escort the solemn cavalcade of soldiers disappearing into the distance. The group had dispersed, leaving only His Highness Prince Yen. Standing alone on one of the few remaining watchtowers over the collapsed city gate, Prince Yen gazed after the Black Iron General without moving, as if he meant to remain there until the end of time. Guyuan didn't glance back. We've ridden so far already. There's no way you can see him clearly, even with the field scope. Don't be ridiculous. If you think I'm blind, then look for yourself, Shunyi snapped, ordering me about again and again. At this rate, people are going to think there's something inappropriate going on between me and the prince. Guyuan had a mouthful of excuses ready and waiting. Why don't you try nailing a bunch of steel panels all over your body and see if you can turn your head? Why are you so full of crap? Shunyi sneered, but didn't bother to expose him. Would I look at him? Guyuan paused, then made himself seem all the more suspicious by responding to his own question. Hardly. Don't assume the meager heart of an old maid like you can take the measure of a great general like me, with a heart large enough to contain a fleet of 100 dragons. It was said that it took 100 days to recover from an injury to ligaments or bones. Guyuan had been dug out from a pile of corpses and dragged back to the land of the living less than half a month ago. Forget a flesh or blood person. Under ordinary circumstances, even a suit of steel armor would be difficult to repair after sustaining that degree of damage. When Guyuan had submitted his request to return to the northwest, Prince Yan had grown so upset he nearly started a row with him before the entire imperial court. Even the lousy Emperor Li Feng, who believed in forcing an ox to work but didn't see the need to feed it, felt a tug on his conscience. But the situation being what it was of critical importance that someone step up to rally the Black Iron Battalion. After failing to lay siege to the capital, the exhausted Westerners had solidified their occupation of all territories south of the Yangtze River. There was no way they had attention to spare for their poverty-stricken allies in the north and west. The allied armies of the western regions were a hideous tangle, and together with the 18 northern barbarian tribes, these forces couldn't be considered a monolithic iron wall. If they could turn the tide on the northwestern front and thereby resolve their most pressing issue, the lack of violet gold, it would be only a matter of time before they beat the foreigners back to their homeland. An army of thousands is easy to raise, but one good general is hard to find. Guyuan had no choice but to go himself. In the end, it was Chen Qingxu who came forward with a solution. In an absurd stroke of genius, she delivered a rush order to Lingshu Institute, prevailing upon them to construct a suit of specially made steel panels that fit flush against Guyuan's body and held his yet unhealed bones in place. Thus, an artificial body, powerful as steel, was created for his use. Though wearing it wasn't a particularly comfortable experience, at the very least, it allowed Guyuan to create the impression that he could come and go like the wind, just as always. Shunyi sighed. Honestly, sir, it's high time you took this seriously. What are you going to do about this? Guyuan very pointedly busied himself with his own thoughts and played deaf. Seeing him feign ignorance again, Shenyi responded by sucking in a huge breath and hollering at the top of his lungs. Honestly, sir, Prince Yan... Hey! Guyuan lashed out with his horsewhip. Shenyi raised his windslasher and narrowly blocked the whip from striking his face, going almost cross-eyed as he patted himself repeatedly on his chest. How terrifying! I was nearly disfigured. Aye, sir, I merely said a few words and you flew off the handle in embarrassment. The way I see it, although the great master Liao Chi was a Dongying spy, the sandalwood-scented nonsense he farted out wasn't wholly off the mark. Your fate really is too tenacious. The red Luen star's been so stifled by your fate that the poor bird can barely fly. And when it finally manages to get off the ground, instead of fresh blooms of love, all it encounters are rotten peach blossoms. Sir, your luck in love stinks. Guyuan didn't know what to say. Shenyi smacked his lips. Guyuan, he mused, really must be struggling to turn his head. Otherwise, he'd long have thrown himself over at Shenyi to beat him to a pulp. Guyuan withdrew his whip and fell silent for a spell. He shook his head and said, Our country was nearly lost. What else can I do? I'll muddle along a day at a time. Who knows? Perhaps one of these days I'll breathe my last on the battlefield. What's the point in getting worked up over it? Shenyi frowned. He understood Guyuan. If this man had absolutely no inclinations in that direction, he would say so outright without a hint of ambiguity. Given what he'd just said, Guyuan wasn't hesitating over his next move. Rather, he already knew what he wanted to do, but had chosen to hold off due to certain misgivings. Wait, Zushi, don't tell me you're... I don't want to talk about it. But he's your son. As if I need you to remind me, Guyuan snapped. He looked away from Shenyi's shocked face in irritation. Guyuan missed this old maid terribly when he wasn't around, yet the moment he saw him again, he found him unbearably irritating. He spurred his horse forward with a squeeze of his legs and galloped away from Shenyi's side. Producing a white jade flute from his lapels, he began to play a whimpering tune. It was impossible for any instrument that fell into Guyuan's hands to produce a pleasing sound. Encased as he was in steel panels that rendered him half a living suit of armor, Guyuan was soon out of breath, and the notes he played quavered. Meanwhile, his fingers pressed against the instrument's holes in a manner as free and unrestrained as an unbridled horse, so that the melody he played seemed to meander almost comically around the whole of Great Liang. Yet as the strains of the flute rippled on the wind, the melody was wrapped in the sighs of those traveling westward through Yang Pass, taking on a shade of indescribable desolation so fitting that those who heard it couldn't seem to laugh at all. Thanks to Miss Chun's steel panels, Guyuan's waist and back were forced perfectly upright. He looked like a pillar that would never fall. 2 distinctly defective windslashers were strapped to his back, neither of which was his own. Chen Qingxu had ridden out with the military retinue. As the sound of the flute drew closer, a thought stirred in the back of her mind. She murmured quietly, "Speak no more of glory and fame. Speak no more of glory and fame," Guyuan cut in impishly as he sped past on horseback. Like ice held in jade, I remained pure and unstained. Chen Qingxu was speechless. After such an incongruous rejoinder, she could no longer remember how the second half of the couplet went. Guyuan marched like the wind. The legendary miracle doctor, Miss Chun, marched with him, so he wasn't at all afraid of the steel panels coming apart. Swiftly leaving the capital behind them, the army advanced northward. They had no sooner stepped beyond the borders of Zhili province than they suffered 2 waves of attacks from vagrants. The attacks didn't amount to much. The miscreants retreated after striking once, fleeing at the slightest touch like a wily pack of feral dogs nosing at them curiously. "They started following us right after we left the capital," Shenyi told Guyuan. "I've crossed swords with them before. They're crafty, and they know the terrain. They'd flee the moment they realized they were outmatched, but in no time at all, they'd go right back to hounding us. It's incredibly annoying. This is about where we were when we received news of the siege on the capital. It was infuriating to have to contend with them during our forced march. Guyuan hummed in response and handed the field scope to Shenyi. It would seem some incompetent military strategist among them has read a book or two. What do you mean? It's said that by affecting an appearance of total defeat, one can dupe their adversaries with a feigned retreat and lure them into giving chase, Guyuan mused. A pity that common foot soldiers do not understand the essence of this tactic. They chop down their commander's banner themselves. I saw it just a second ago. Shenyi stared at him. Guyuan frowned. Why are these people revolting anyway? Have they no other way to make a living? Hardly, Shenyi sneered. You think much too kindly of these miscreants. Even if they had no land to farm, most ordinary folk will find ways to engage in business or learn a new trade. It's unlikely they would end up so desperate that they find it impossible to scrape by. These vagrants roaming between the Central Plains and Central Shu are idlers who were organized by someone with ulterior motives. Aside from harassing General Tsai, they specialize in the business of pillage and plunder. They go to ground whenever General Tsai runs after them. They return once things have settled down. I've heard that they rob everyone they come across, but they have this rule. Families who send grown men to join the bandits' rebellion are spared their vicious attacks. This way, their wives, sisters, and daughters are protected and needn't live in constant fear of abduction. Wait, Guyuan said after a long silence. This policy sounds rather familiar. Is this not the same as Great Liang's conscripted labor system? Military families don't pay taxes. Shenyi was at the end of his patience. Sir, whose side are you on? All right, calm down, Guyuan said. In that case, aren't there just going to be more and more bandits? Not only can they avoid taxes, if they join up, they can avoid the worst of the chaos of war. Who's their leader? Apparently, they're led by a scary-looking old bandit who's been in the business for years. They say he's covered in scars and even has a burn scar on his face. He calls himself Fire Dragon. Shenyi sighed. What should we do? Pick up our pace? Ride hard for a few days to bypass this mob and head directly to Saibing's reinforcement encamped in the northwest? Guyuan paced back and forth with his hands clasped behind his back for several minutes before speaking. With trouble brewing both at home and abroad, any bit of unrest we can quell matters. Tigers and wolves prowl at our gates. We cannot afford to fear trouble from within them. Draft a memorial. Report to the Guard Council that we will remain in the area for a few days. In the aftermath of the capital siege, Li Feng had eliminated the twin sinecures of the Grand Chancellors of the left and right and established the Grand Council to lead the 6 ministries, bringing into service a group of capable civil officials who pulled no punches in a crisis. The Grand Council's offices were invariably brightly lit well into the night. When Jiang Chong walked through their doors, it was already past midnight. The room was as bright as day from the glow of the gas lamps, yet Prince Yan had fallen asleep on the table with a brush in hand. Jiang Chong had no wish to disturb him. After personally accepting the stack of memorials that had been delivered by palace attendants, he dismissed the servants and stepped as quietly as he could into the office. But he was, after all, a civil official with no real notion of how to conceal his steps. Despite his caution, Chang'eng was startled awake. In the moment the eyes of the ever-poised Prince Yan fluttered open, an ominous red glint flickered through their depths, like a surge of killing intent rushing toward the man standing before him. In an instant, Jiang Chong's back was drenched in a sheen of cold sweat, like a rabbit frozen by the murderous aura of a ferocious beast. He took an involuntary step back. His long sleeve caught on Chang'eng's brush stand, and the whole affair promptly fell over with a clatter. Only then did Chang'eng wake completely. He tucked away his killing intent in a blink, like a gust of wind scattering clouds, and rose to his feet. It's okay. I can clean that up. Jiang Chong looked at him, scared witless. He wondered whether he was seeing things in his exhaustion. Did your Majesty have a nightmare? He probed cautiously. It's nothing, Chang'eng said easily. It's because I fell asleep with something pressed against my chest. I might have frightened you with my unpleasant expression. I tend to wake up cranky. Just now, I was a bit disoriented, so for a moment I couldn't figure out where I was. It wouldn't do for Jiang Chong to pry any further, though he couldn't help but feel that Prince Yan's sleep-induced crankiness was rather excessive. Chang'e set the fallen brush stand back to rights. Is there something I can help you with, Han Shishong? Jiang Chong quickly regathered his wits and took a seat across from him. It's about what Your Highness proposed in court yesterday, that the government issue these so-called war beacon tickets to the masses. It's raised quite a stir among the court officials. To begin with, the government borrowing money from the common people is completely unprecedented. Doesn't this amount to an open declaration that the national treasury is empty? Would that not be a great humiliation for the court? Chang'e still seemed groggy as he sat up in his chair and kneaded at the space between his brows. But at Jiang Chong's question, he smiled. Half the country has been lost. What humiliation could be greater? Others ask what to do if the bonds come due and the government cannot repay the loan. Jiang Chong continued, Your Highness knows as well as I do the present state of the treasury. Split the payments into installments to be repaid at different times. We can issue second or even third batches of war beacon tickets later. As long as we raise enough money at the start, we should be able to keep them in circulation. Chang'e said, Buyers of the first batch of war beacon tickets ought to receive some suitable material benefit. Titles of nobility, nominal positions in court, specially chartered concessions, anything is fine. Ideally, if we commit fully to this scheme, our citizens will be able to use war beacon tickets the same as silver. But in that case, Jiang Chong said, hesitant, won't the tickets flood the market? Eventually, they'll be completely worthless. Once the government has recovered, we can buy the bonds back, Chang'e said. Whether we buy back all the bonds or continue with the policy, whether we set up a special agency to deal with the program or issue a new set of laws and decrees, we can decide all this once our circumstances have improved. Jiang Chong nodded. Some are also asking what we'll do if people create counterfeit tickets and use them to demand money from the government down the line. Jiang Chong broke into incredulous laughter. Such a question should be relayed to the Lingshu Institute. Must such trifling details be addressed by the Grand Council? Shall we have a discussion on the standardization of toilets next? Jiang Chong grimaced. Your Highness's reasoning is sound, but you know how it is with the Imperial Censorate. They have no real work other than picking fights. As I've heard it, they've been burning the midnight oil, drafting memorials accusing you of all manner of evil deeds. Chang'e sighed. I could give 1,000 more reasons. At this point, this is but a stopgap measure to ameliorate a desperate situation in times of war. What else can we do? Levy heavy taxes on the refugees taking shelter in the city? Or perhaps we should tear down His Majesty's palace and sell it for parts? If the officials have concerns, they may raise them in court. I'll answer what questions I can then and there, and as for the ones I can't, I'll come back here and consider them fully before responding. These people. That was the way of this government. A small group of individuals were responsible for doing the actual work, while the greater majority were responsible for nitpicking and dragging the doers down. If everything worked out, the nitpickers would boast of their circumspection and discernment. Should plans fail, however, they wouldn't hesitate to demand, "Why didn't you listen?" This was to say nothing of those who muddied the waters and set up stumbling blocks in order to further their own interests and schemes. To get something done was no less difficult than climbing to the heavens. Everyone knew their purported wisdom of attaining enlightenment by listening to both sides, but it was little wonder that most of the individuals whose glorious names were inked in the annals of history were dictatorial sovereigns or officials capable of overwhelming the quibbling of the court. It's no reflection on you, Han Shishong, so please take no offense. Chang'e waved a hand. I spent so much of my breath arguing with these people lately that I've grown rather short-tempered. Speaking of the Lingshu Institute, said Jiang Chong, Master Feng Han submitted another pair of memorials yesterday. I took the liberty of holding them back for the time being. Perhaps Your Highness can take a look and determine whether or not it's wise to submit them to His Majesty. Chang'e poured himself a cup of cold tea that had been left out from earlier in the day. What does he have to say? The first requests that His Majesty repeal the Token of Mastery law and lift the prohibition on civilian artificers. The second asks that His Majesty terminate the ban on civilian trade of violet gold. Master Feng Han asserts that the rich merchants within the borders most certainly have their own connections for the trade of this substance. With the nation in crisis, he claims it would be better to leverage them and secure whatever additional internal sources of violet gold we can. Chang'eng hesitated a moment, then shook his head. Master Feng Han, oh Master Feng Han. The elderly gentleman's stalwart integrity had left a deep impression on Li Fang. He hadn't hesitated to fight with everything he had during the capital siege. Although the old coot had an awful temper and was stubborn as a mule, his loyalty was unimpeachable. Thus, it was that in recent days, Li Fang did his best to tolerate the man when he occasionally lapsed into such impolitic blather. Have the rest of the council review the memorial on the repeal of the Token of Mastery law. If there are no glaring issues, we can submit it to His Majesty, Chang'eng said. As for the one on violet gold, forget about it. Does it amuse him to provoke the Emperor like this? Draft a tactful summary on Master Feng Han's behalf for submission. Send the original back. Feeling rather helpless, Jiang Chong murmured his assent. Yet, as he was rising to leave, he remembered another matter. He turned back and said, That's right. A memorial has also come from the Marquis of Anding. Chang'eng's head snapped up. Li Feng had returned the Black Iron Tiger Tally to Gu Yuan, thereby granting the Marquis the authority to deploy troops throughout the nation and prepare in all ways for war. At this point, there was no need for Gu Yuan to report every one of his moves, big or small, and regardless of importance, back to his superior. Yet Gu Yuan didn't seem to appreciate this kindness. He followed procedure to the letter and sent regular memorials back to the court. The places he'd been, the state of the battlefield, his subsequent plans, and the reasons therefor. Everything was laid out in exacting detail. The Marquis of Anding has arrived in the Central Plains, Jiang Chong said. He made no mention of anything requiring urgent action, only that they had encountered a disorderly mob of bandits. He's planning on cleaning house there before continuing on, but claims it oughtn't take more than a few days. Chang'eng hummed in acknowledgement. Leave it here. I'll take a look. Jiang Chong sighed, deeply moved. All matters large and small cross your highness's desk. You listen to a cursory briefing when it comes to the rest, but read Marshal Gu's memorials with care from top to bottom. Your highness's affection for the marshal truly is profound. After saying his goodbyes, Jiang Chong made to take his leave. Just as he reached the door, however, Chang'eng called him to a stop once more. Han Shushong. Jiang Chong turned back, puzzled. Yes, your highness? Chang'eng placed a palm over Gu Yuan's memorial, absently smoothing the paper. After a long silence, he finally asked, features serene as a still pond. Could I please trouble you to collect the objections voiced in court regarding the war beacon tickets? Mark down who said what, and when. I will take their concerns under advisement and revise my proposal. Jiang Chong started in surprise. What did such factors as who and when have to do with revising a proposal? He couldn't help but study Prince Yan under the light of those gas lamps that burned through the night. This prince's face was young, but his eyes held none of the immaturity of youth. At first glance, he appeared to be an elegant young master of noble birth. Upon further examination, however, his gaze was not invigorating like a warm spring breeze, but gave off a subtle chill. He recalled hearing that the late emperor had entrusted the fourth prince to Gu Yuan on his deathbed, and that the boy had grown up sequestered within the Marquis of Anding's estate. Now Jiang Chong was surprised to find that the prince was actually nothing like the Marquis who raised him. Yes, your highness, Jiang Chong finally responded after a beat. Chang'eng inclined his head slightly. They were both clever men. There was no need to elaborate. Not until Jiang Chong finally left with his heart full of misgivings did Chang'eng let out a soft sigh. He slept poorly to begin with, and when he finally managed to fall into a fitful and unpleasant nap, it was interrupted by more court business. At this rate, he was likely to be up the entire night. Chang'eng stood and changed the room's incense. switching it out for Miss Chun's pacifying fragrance. Chang'e stood silently before the pacifying fragrance for a spell, letting the scent wash over him. Just now, a nightmare had whipped through his mind. He could barely remember it, but it had caused his chest to flare with pain, as if it were being stabbed by needles. He'd managed to suppress his discomfort while in Jiang Chong's presence, but the feeling was familiar. It was much like the handful of Wu'erge attacks he had experienced. Miss Chun had marched with the army to keep an eye on Gu Yuan's injuries. Before leaving, she had pulled Chang'e aside and instructed him to increase his dosage of pacifying fragrance and to rest and recuperate as much as possible. The great emotional upheaval Chang'e had suffered in the past days had utterly toppled the foundation of disciplined equanimity he had built over many years. From here on out, suppressing his condition would become increasingly difficult. When it came to fighting the Wu'erge, the worst things one could do were to fret and overthink. These were particularly damaging to one's peace of mind. But what choice did he have? Chapter 69. Life History. Taiping found himself deeply vexed by the bandit mob rampaging throughout the Central Plains. The old general was getting along in years, and although the massive military force under his command seemed mighty and majestic, it was in reality known as the retiree army. The garrison was situated in the middle of nowhere in a region characterized by safety and stability. Aside from putting down the occasional bout of civil unrest, the Central Plains Army primarily served as a bank of reinforcements for the border garrisons. At present, the two battlefronts in the northwest had requisitioned the majority of Taiping's active troops. His forces included no armored hawks, and he was a cautious man by nature. He didn't dare take too many risks. Thus, this mob had harassed him beyond endurance. Gu Yuan spent several days verifying the origins and habits of the mob, examining the map, and familiarizing himself with the terrain. When he was satisfied, he dispatched a messenger to contact General Cai with a plan to make pot stickers. The bandit rebels hadn't the least idea who was leading the contingent from the capital, but after sounding these newcomers out several times, they had determined this party to be even weaker than Taiping's forces. Their heavy armor and cannons looked intimidating, but they never opened fire. At most, they fielded some light cavalrymen who would give chase for a few kilometers before being recalled. Thus, they determined that this group of soldiers was a band of impressive-looking but useless idiots. Yet, just as the bandits had resolved to surround their prey once and for all, Taiping seemed to suddenly lose his mind. He abandoned his previous style of combat, which consisted of solely defending and never pursuing, and turned out in full strength, leading the remaining troops stationed in the Central Plains garrison in a surprise attack to hem in the rebel mob. In truth, the Central Plains garrison hadn't much strength left to speak of. If the two sides really fought it out, neither side would easily prevail. But the bandit rabble had grown accustomed to the garrison troops' flirtatious back-and-forth style of provocation. Believing themselves to be infallible fighters, uncatching as a slippery loach, the bandits were reluctant to commit their resources to this fight in earnest. They once again employed those familiar hit-and-run tactics, retreating with the intent to lead Taiping's forces on a wild goose chase, only to turn and find Gu Yuan, who had long been lying in wait. Gu Yuan commanded his heavy armor infantry to move their cannons into position and aim directly into the bandit mob. When the bandit leader saw that the young noble masters from the capital were once again trying to frighten them, he ordered his men to charge through the heavy armor formation. The line of heavy armor broke at the slightest touch, and light cavalrymen rode to the fore, struggling to repel the enemy. Seeing that these cannons were no different from the papier-mâché models incapable of opening fire, the bandit leader was smugly pleased. His tactics became increasingly brazen, and he personally led the charge through the enemy's light-armored cavalry. When the bandits had completely fallen into Gu Yuan's trap, those papier-mâché cannons suddenly roared to life. Caught off guard, the bandit mobs fell to pieces. They were given no opportunity to retreat. That skittish light cavalry, which had been cautiously evading their attacks, now galloped over to join General Tsai's troops in surrounding the bandits on both sides, indeed sealing them up much like a pot sticker. In this way, the bandit mob was soundly defeated, and the legendary fire dragon captured alive. The bandit leader's body was pitted with scars so ugly Guyuan's eyes hurt at the mere sight of him. He planned to toss the man to Shen Yi to play with as soon as possible and commanded offhandedly, "Ask him the whereabouts of his accomplices, the identity of his instigators, the location of his base, and whether he has anything in it worth plundering." Shen Yi choked on his own breath and began coughing violently. "Sir, has poverty driven you mad?" Guyuan waved a hand. "I'm not saying beat him up, just rigorously extort a confession. I'm going to catch up with old Tsai." He was about to leave when he noticed one of his personal guards holding a peculiarly shaped short sword. It was slightly longer than a dagger, and its tip curved back in a graceful arc, quite unlike the short swords commonly used in the Central Plains. Guyuan found it somewhat familiar and reached out to take it. "Sir, we found this on the bandit leader." Guyuan drew the short sword from its scabbard and ran a curious finger over the blade. He narrowed his eyes. "A barbarian weapon?" he asked in a low voice. "It's a scimitar from the 18 tribes," Chen Qingshu offered as she stepped over. "My lord, have the steel panels come loose?" "No. We've troubled Miss Chun to no end following us as we ran all over the place in the middle of the night." Guyuan shook his head, then took the short sword by the hilt. "Huh. The hilt's so short. Won't one's hands get stuck?" "It's not that the hilt is short. It's just that it doesn't fit the Marquis's hand. The blade belonged to a woman." Chen Qingshu took the scimitar and tested its weight. The 18 northern tribes endure a life of hardship exposed to the elements, fighting ferocious beasts for every morsel. That's why their blades often have this groove to the hilt. It prevents the wielder from losing their grip should they encounter a particularly powerful foe. This blade is very finely wrought. It must have belonged to someone of high status. The hilt was likely specially commissioned, so the owner must have had very small hands, even smaller than mine, and was likely a woman. Look here, my lord." Chen Qingshu turned the hilt over for Guyuan to inspect. Ringing the pommel was a complex design, a totem of countless entwining flowering vines wreathing what appeared to be a burning flame in the center. "I saw this floral design on some abandoned ruins within the 18 tribes' territory," she said softly. "According to kidnapped Chinese slaves I spoke to, this is a sign of the goddess of the 18 tribes." "I know." Guyuan's face was grave. "And I also know who the symbol in the middle represents." Shen Yi, who had joined them at some point, inhaled sharply when he saw the design. "The heart of the earth?" "The what?" Chen Qingshu asked. "Hugar. Xuniang," Shen Yi responded. Didn't she die years ago? How could this be?" Guyuan beckoned him to follow. With the short sword in hand, he turned and strolled back into the room where the bandit leader known as Fire Dragon was confined, dismissing the soldier standing guard with a wave of his hand. His expression as he held the short sword was absent joy or anger. The gently curved blade appeared very odd, but it was as viciously sharp as ever. Such a blade could effortlessly shear off a chunk of flesh were it to bite into a body. Guyuan pressed the tip of this sword to the underside of Fire Dragon's chin. "I hear you refuse to reveal your rebel army's base, and that you won't tell us who convinced you to take advantage of the chaos to harass General Tsai's army either." "Fuck you, you useless pretty boy," Fire Dragon spat. Guyuan smiled, reveling in the man's contempt. In his opinion, cursing someone by calling them a pretty boy was much like calling a woman a huli jing. It only meant the one being reviled had a lovely face. "I suppose it doesn't matter whether you speak or not," Guyuan said, the very picture of calm. He turned to Shen Yi. The nation is in crisis, yet this man plotted conspiracy and colluded with foreign enemies, betraying his country by working with the northern barbarians. Your barbarian backers haven't even set foot in the country, yet you're already licking their boots. Interrogating you is a waste of time. I'll make the pronouncement tomorrow. You're to be publicly executed by 1,000 cuts. Halfway through Guyuan's speech, Fire Dragon's face took on a look of bewilderment which slowly melted into horror. When he saw Guyuan straighten irreverently and realized the man wasn't joking around, Fire Dragon began to struggle desperately against his bounds. You government dogs, this is slander! My brothers all know that I, the great Fire Dragon, am an upstanding and dauntless man of courage. How dare you sully my name with these lies? Slander. Guyuan waved the sword that had once belonged to a woman of the 18 tribes before Fire Dragon's face. We of the Central Plains refer to these things as wolves' fangs. This crescent arc here at the tip of the blade is typical of these barbarian-made weapons. Is this not yours? Fire Dragon was stunned. The scabbard and groove both seemed to be unique. A top-grade leather scabbard, and a totem on the hilt so finely wrought it could be mistaken for a living flame. This is no doubt the work of a master blacksmith. An ordinary barbarian hasn't the means to wield a blade like this, so it stands to reason that its owner was someone of great wealth and high status. Guyuan lifted his chin slightly and looked askance at Fire Dragon. You ugly brute! Your brothers know that you carried this trinket with you day and night, but none of them know its origin, do they? A band of ignorant peasants. Hold on! Wait a minute! Fire Dragon cried. That blade belongs to my greatest nemesis. It's not... Guyuan burst into laughter. Oh, yes, that sounds totally believable. I've seen people carrying lovers' tokens, but this is the first time I've seen someone so attached to their hated foe. What kind of sentimental hatred is this? Please enlighten me. That woman drugged over 100 of my brothers and stabbed them to death one by one. Then she set fire to our stronghold and torched the entire mountain. Even the birds were burned to a crisp. I was the lone survivor, but I was left covered in these scars. I don't fucking know where she came from. I didn't know she was a barbarian either. I carry this blade as a reminder of my past humiliation. Fire Dragon bellowed furiously. Filthy government dogs! You can slander me however you like, but if you dare say I colluded with that woman's ilk, even if I die, I'll come back as a ghost and bite you to death. Those teeth of yours must be mighty sharp then, Shun Yi said with a thin smile. Go on, tell us the rest of this tall tale. So a barbarian woman burrows her way into a bandit nest for heaven knows what reason, then burns down a mountain full of bandits single-handedly? Truly a novel tale. Marshall, I don't believe I've ever heard such a fascinating story even from the theater troupes when they performed at your estate. Guyuan sighed. What theater troupes? I can't even afford meat anymore. I was eating porridge every day. Fire Dragon stared blankly. Marshall. Which Marshall? Guyuan flourished the short sword in his hand with a malicious smile. Fire Dragon inhaled sharply. Could it be that you're calling for your mama? Well, she can't help you now, Shun Yi cut him off. Speak. Let's hear how you colluded with the barbarians to prey upon your fellow countrymen. Fire Dragon's face flushed with anger. I said she's my enemy. Heaven strike me down. I swear I'm not fucking lying. That woman was traveling with a small merchant caravan. I think she was separated from her family and had paid the merchants to bring her along. I don't know where she was going because we robbed them before they reached their destination. She was a looker, so we took her back to our mountain hideout. She had an infant with her, barely a month old. She was also pregnant with a second child. Shun Yi felt a prickle of unease, but remained outwardly calmed. When was this? 19, maybe 20 years ago. Guyuan and Shun Yi exchanged a furtive look in the dim lamplight. That was around the time of the barbarian goddess's escape. In that case, the infant was likely Chang'an. But what of the child in Xunyang's belly? What happened next? Shun Yi asked. Fire Dragon looked up and said in a hoarse voice, Lots of people off themselves when they were dragged back to the mountain. But that woman was different. She had a beautiful face, but her mind seemed broken. She didn't respond when spoken to and didn't cry when beaten. She never resisted, no matter what we did to her. After a few months, she went into early labor and gave birth to her child. Guyuan's hand tightened slightly around the hilt of the short sword. For some reason, he was suddenly filled with apprehension. His intuition, which had for years never failed him, began to stir. They say women who've recently given birth are unclean, so no one touched her right away. No one paid her much attention at all, but to keep her from making a run for it, we chained her by her ankle and left her in her room. We gave her a little food every day, and she managed to scrape by. After some time, one of my stupid brothers, who was obsessed with that bitch's beauty, went to see her in secret. But when he got back, he was spooked. He told me the woman had only one child left, that the other babe had disappeared. Shunyi seemed to forget that he was trying to extort a confession. He blurted, "Which one?" "The fuck should I know? They were half-dead whelps who looked like giant rats, all skin and bones." Fire Dragon immediately grew guarded. "Why do you ask?" Shunyi froze, then lashed the horsewhip in his hand violently to the side. "If you don't know anything, then why the fuck are you still talking?" he asked coldly. "What's so strange about a barbarian brat dying? We asked you to explain the presence of this blade. Why are you dragging this out? What are you waiting for?" But instead of growing angry again, Fire Dragon's expression became tense. "No, a dead child isn't strange. Kids like that have ignoble fates, and plenty of them end up dead. What was strange was that, according to my brother, there was no body. That woman was chained in the room. There was no way for her to leave, so she couldn't have buried it. Yet she didn't toss the body outside, nor did she keep it with her. That child just vanished into thin air. One of my brothers, who'd been on patrol at the time, claimed he saw firelight coming from the woman's room in the middle of the night. At first, I thought she must have been secretly cooking to feed herself, but later, I heard that the entire time she was chained in that room, there were crows circling the roof beams." Shunyi's skin broke out into goose flesh. He glanced instinctively at Guyuan. The scarred corner of Fire Dragon's eye twitched several times. Everyone grew anxious after that incident. Some said the woman was a demonic enchantress, that she was abnormal, and wanted to kill her right then. Others were enraptured by her beauty and couldn't bear the thought. We brothers argued among ourselves for a long time, but never came to any kind of conclusion. At the time, my Dage found her obedient, capable, and good in the sack, so he spared her. We kept her with us, along with that half-dead brat, for many years." Fire Dragon sighed. "But that woman really was a demon. Seriously. If none of the men sought her out at night, she would have come up with all sorts of ways to torture that child. You could hear the little brat yowling from a mountain away. There were a few times my brother couldn't stand it anymore and told her to cut it out. She'd nod obediently, then turn around and start up again the next minute." Guyuan shot to his feet. Shunyi's heart clenched in apprehension. He could see the veins bulging across the top of Guyuan's hand where he gripped the short sword behind his back. Fortunately, Fire Dragon did not notice. He seemed immersed in his own memories. "It's said that a tiger cruel enough will not eat its own cubs," he mumbled. "We were bandits, malicious individuals, one and all with no fear of divine retribution. Even so, we'd never seen such a vicious woman. Who knows what kind of love potion she fed our Daga? He insisted it was fitting that a woman with such a disgraceful background should remain on the mountain, and that we ought to consider her one of us. He was obsessed with her, and it was his obsession that ended up getting him killed." There was a subtle hoarseness to Guyuan's voice when he finally spoke. "How was he killed?" "Poisoned. That barbarian woman's body was steeped in poison. She concealed her true nature for many years. Over time, we dropped our guard. We were easily taken in by her ruse. She killed everyone on our mountain stronghold, even her fellow women, those who had been kidnapped and taken up the mountain just like her, slaves, hostages. She didn't spare a single soul. And when she was done, she burned the mountain to the ground. Pain flashed across Fire Dragon's face, and he began to curse, letting loose a long stream of obscenities. This time, no one was of mind to cut him off. Guyuan's expression had become unsightly. He could barely contain himself. I happened to be sick to my stomach that day. I didn't dare drink anything, whether wine or water. That was the only reason I had the strength to crawl out of the sea of fire and survive. The knife. I pulled that knife out of my dagu's chest. If I ever see that woman again, I swear to all the gods I'll chop her to pieces. Was she carrying the child when she killed everyone and set fire to the mountain? Guyuan asked in a low voice. She was carrying that brat in a basket on her back, Fire Dragon said. The kid always looked half dead. When I saw them, he seemed boneless lying inside the bamboo basket, staring at the corpses all over the ground. He didn't even cry. After all these years, if he didn't end up dying by that woman's hand, then he'll surely become a bloodthirsty monster. At this point, Guyuan turned and left without another word. Shunyi hurried after him. Sir? Sir! We cannot allow that man to live, Guyuan said, his speech quick and muted. Old Tsai is still here. Shut that pus-filled blister up permanently and cleanly before he notices. Guyuan's footfalls came to a halt as another thought came to him. His face turned stormy. I forgot. There's also that Jiala Yinghua. Back in Yinhui town, he and Xu Niang were in constant communication. That barbarian certainly knows something. Sir! Shunyi was alarmed. He didn't tell me. Guyuan's shoulders suddenly slumped. Even now, the steel panels affixed on his body held him upright, his posture unnaturally stiff. He never told me anything. He didn't mention it at all. I knew that woman's head was filled with thoughts of vengeance, that she wouldn't have treated him especially well. But still, they were blood relatives. You had no idea what that crazy woman Hu Gaar did back then, Shunyi hurried to cut in. 20 years ago, you were a snot-nosed brat learning to write. Enough already, Zishi. This isn't your fault. When we found him in that snowstorm, it wasn't because he was a naughty kid who had snuck off to play, Guyuan said quietly. It was obviously because he couldn't bear the abuse anymore, so he... And yet, out of the kindness of their hearts, they had sent him right back. Shunyi didn't know what to say. After a long silence, he finally muttered, What if, and I'm just speaking in terms of what if, the surviving child wasn't the noble consort's son? Shunyi couldn't help but recall how years ago, a young Chang'eng had calmly said to his face that he wasn't a prince, that his foot's small deformity had been smashed into being by Xu Niang herself. Guyuan jerked his head up. What are you trying to say? It doesn't matter who his mother is, whether it's a shamaness of the 18 tribes or her sister. The problem is, who fathered Hu Gaar's child? Shunyi licked the corner of his mouth nervously. Back then, the noble consort's sister had been living in the imperial palace, waiting to be wedded to a member of the imperial family. Was the Yuanhe emperor someone capable of stealing from his own coffers? If the late emperor had indeed been so shameless, then everyone could breathe a sigh of relief. But what if he hadn't? If the father wasn't the late emperor, then the most likely suspect was the man who had helped the sisters escape that year, someone who harbored ill intentions yet had access to the forbidden areas of the palace, someone who had the ability to free the shamaness of the 18 tribes and assume control of the operatives planted by that pair of sisters. All of these specifications, when put together, easily called to mind one great master Liao Chi and his Dongying spies. Shunyi's entire body turned ice cold. Sir, this is... Guyuan glanced up at him, his eyes sharp as knives. Shunyi shut his mouth immediately. We will never speak of this again. Guyuan looked back down and ran his hands over the short sword in his hand. When he next spoke, his voice was like iron. As for the northern barbarians, sooner or later I'll take care of them too. Henceforth, I don't want to hear any mention of this. Yes, sir, said Shunyi. Guyuan left, his expression bleak as stagnant water. With the steel panels preventing him from bending a centimeter, his departing figure seemed particularly brooding as he sought out Chun Qingxu once again. "Miss Chun, a word," Gu Yuan said. Perplexed, Chun Qingxu followed him over to the side of the room. "Miss Chun, you are a master of medicine and have spent over half a year traveling through the barbarians' territories. I would like to seek your guidance regarding a certain matter." Chun Qingxu curtsied hastily. "I dare not accept such praise." Gu Yuan helped her rise absently, his thoughts elsewhere. "Do the barbarians have any sort of special shamanic techniques that make use of infants?" Chun Qingxu was shocked. Gu Yuan didn't miss the trace of astonishment that flickered briefly across her face. "What is it?" Chun Qingxu was silent for a long while, shifting uneasily from foot to foot. Finally, she exhaled heavily. "Marshal, have you ever heard of Wu Ge?" Chapter 70. Wicked God. Gu Yuan frowned, sifting carefully through his memory. "It sounds familiar. I do think I've heard this name before. Some kind of god in the north?" "Wu Ge is the leader of the 4 great wicked gods worshipped by the 18 tribes," Chun Qingxu said carefully. "According to legend, the god has 4 legs, 4 arms, 2 heads, and 2 hearts, and presides over tempests and famine. Wu Ge is an avaricious god, and his arrival is heralded by upheaval in heaven and on earth. He is the most fearsome god on the northern barbarian territories, said to be destined to devour all living things." Gu Yuan hummed in response, failing to grasp her point. "I spent half a year wandering deep in the grasslands, but even so, I have gleaned merely a smattering of knowledge when it comes to the 18 tribes' shamanic arts. It is impossible for outsiders like us to fathom the profound nature and long history of this practice. Many shamanic techniques are inseparable from strange legends involving their wicked gods. The most ruthless among them is the Wu Ge." Chun Qingxu paused briefly. 4 legs, 4 arms, 2 heads, and 2 hearts. What image does this bring to mind? Gu Yuan hesitated. "It sounds like what you get if you fuse 2 people together." "Indeed," Chun Qingxu said. "The wicked god Wu Ge swallowed his brother the moment he was born, thereby doubling his divine powers. Within the 18 tribes, there is an ancient shamanic technique. First, a pair of brothers linked by blood are selected and merged together shortly after birth. The peculiar individual who results from this ritual acquires the power of the wicked god. They are also referred to as Wu Ge." After hearing this, Gu Yuan said nothing for some time. He pressed a hand to his chest. It was supported and protected by steel panels, yet for some reason, he still felt a stab of pain beneath his ribs. "My lord, your injuries," began Chun Qingxu. "I'm fine." Gu Yuan waved away her concern. He licked his lips, then asked slowly, "Miss Chun, I don't quite understand. What do you mean by merged together?" Chun Qingxu seemed to waver. "It's okay," Gu Yuan said. "Go ahead and speak." "I've heard only rumors, so this may not be entirely accurate," Chun Qingxu said, lowering her voice. "The shamans place a pair of infants in a sealed-off space with no light, water, or food. Inevitably, one of the 2 will suffocate. They remove the dead infant and refine its body using a secret technique." For a moment, Gu Yuan thought perhaps his medicine had worn off and his ears were failing him. "What?" he squeezed out with difficulty. "They refine the body," Chun Qingxu enunciated the words clearly. "Then, using the barbarian shamaness's secret potion as an excipient, they slowly feed the resulting tincture to the surviving sibling." "Can a child survive such a thing?" Gu Yuan blurted out. "The marshal underestimates the 18 tribes' millennia-old shamanic arts," Chun Qingxu said with a sigh. "Never mind refining the bodies of living humans. There are even records of lost shamanic techniques that can transform the dead into walking corpses. The tribes believe the infants who have undergone such refinement are the embodiment of Wu Ge. Even in early childhood, they display either extraordinary physical strength or unusual intelligence. This is because, as they see it, these individuals are actually two people with 4 legs and 2 heads, and can draw on the wicked god's power. This isn't really my area of expertise, Guyuan began hesitantly. Please forgive my ignorance, Miss Chun, but this sounds like superstitious hokum propagated by the uncultured masses. To put it in terms more congruous with our own frame of reference, my lord can regard Wuarge as a virulent poison that destroys the mind. After all, there are indeed some madmen who possess incredible physical prowess and are capable of seeing things from perspectives inaccessible to the average person. It's not unusual for such individuals to appear extraordinarily quick-witted when they can maintain clarity of mind. And what of the things that cannot be explained using their frame of reference? Guyuan asked. To be honest with you, Marshal, the reason I trespassed into the 18 tribes' territory and inquired after the shamanic arts wasn't solely to find a cure for your eyes and ears. It was also to track down what information I could on the Wuarge. But the barbarians have very few written records of this ritual. This is only one story passed down from ancient times that tells of a great general named Wuarge. This general was cruel and bloodthirsty, but emerged victorious from every battle and single-handedly unified the 18 tribes' territories into what we see today. It's said this hero lived for 32 years and remained unmarried their entire life, because they were neither dead nor alive, neither woman nor man. Guyuan broke out in gooseflesh. After researching this individual's life history and the circumstances of their birth, I learned that their mother originally gave birth to fraternal twins, a boy and a girl. However, there was no later mention of the girl, nor was her death documented in any records. There are 2 possible explanations. Either the girl was lost in the course of the family's decline, or the twins had been transformed into a Wuarge, and the dead girl had been fused with her living twin. The boy and girl had grown into one being and become neither dead nor alive, neither man nor woman. The hand pressed against Guyuan's chest clenched into a fist. Chun Qingshu asked nervously, My lord, have the steel panels come loose? Guyuan bent over at the waist. The moment stretched. Finally, he sucked in a deep breath and said in a low voice, Why would anyone do such a thing? Chun Qingshu helped him to a seat. In almost all cases, it's only when their nation has fallen or their family is in imminent danger that the people of the 18 tribes can bear to do a thing so cruel as sacrifice their own kin to a wicked god for the sake of vengeance. Whensoever a Wuarge comes into the world, their arrival portends a sea of carnage. Just now, you said the Wuarge is like a poison that destroys the mind, Guyuan said. Please explain what you mean. Wuarge inevitably go insane, Chun Qingshu said. Initially, they are beset by constant nightmares. Then, over time, they become increasingly susceptible to paranoia. If they do not make some attempt to regulate their mental state, they will also begin to hallucinate, until finally, that's why. Guyuan said merely 2 words, yet his voice was already so rough that it cracked. Only after vigorously clearing his throat could he continue. That's why you prescribed the pacifying fragrance. Chun Qingshu was silent. Of course she knew whom Guyuan was talking about. She had no way to refute it. Her silence was a tacit admission. Guyuan closed his eyes briefly. He recalled Chang'eng mentioning offhand on more than one occasion that he suffered from poor sleep due to excess internal heat in the liver or some such thing. Guyuan had never taken his words seriously. He'd assumed the boy had been consumed by his medical studies with the Chun family, rambling on and on like an old geezer about the need to maintain good health every hour of the day. But all this time, he'd been secretly bearing such a great hardship. How far along is Chang'eng's condition? Guyuan asked. For a time, Chun Qingshu didn't respond. Tell me, Guyuan said, his voice faint. No matter how bad it is, I can handle it. So long as I live, regardless of whether he's mad or witless, I'll take responsibility for him to the end. His Highness... Chun Qing-shu began slowly. His Highness is incredibly strong of will and calm of mind. Even after so many years, he has rarely suffered Wu-Arge attacks. He's well aware of his condition, so he shows much greater restraint than the average person. But recently... I've already treated him with acupuncture, so my lord needn't worry. Her words were vague, but Guyuan understood. He had always been calm of mind and rarely suffered Wu-Arge attacks, until recently. It was because of me, Guyuan thought, lost. He jerked upright like a reanimated corpse and staggered several steps forward, his expression no less pained than if he had been stabbed with a knife. He shook off Chun Qing-shu's attempts to lend him a steadying arm and hobbled off in a daze. With the rigid steel plates keeping his spine straight, he seemed like an iron puppet running on its last dregs of violet gold. Chun Qing-shu stood in place for a time, a grave expression on her pale face. She couldn't help but turn her eyes in the direction of the capital. The wooden bird she had sent a few days prior should have arrived by now, but was the decision she had written of in her letter truly correct? The sky above the capital was deeply overcast. The wooden bird was almost invisible as it cut through the air, its tiny body vanishing into the oppressive black clouds that hung overhead. Zhang Fenghan stepped down from a horse-drawn carriage, then turned back toward the man inside with cupped hands. Thank you, Your Highness, for going out of your way to bring an old geezer like me this far. Chang'e lifted the hanging screen on the carriage window. I've spent too many days at the office of the Grand Council, Chang'e said with a smile. It's time I returned to the Marquis estate, at least for a fresh change of clothes. This was on the way for me, so Master Fenghan needn't be so courteous. Although, did the Lingshu Institute not provide you with a carriage? Zhang Fenghan seemed unbothered. They're all being used to run errands. I never leave the capital anyway. It's only right that I give this weary old body of mine some exercise. With fighting breaking out in every quarter of the nation, there are many demands on the national treasury. Any bit of money saved counts. Even if I can't turn the tide myself, surely I can still do my best with what little strength I have. Chang'e laughed. Indeed, this junior has been enlightened. As Zhang Fenghan hastily moved to protest, he dared not accept such praise from the prince. Chang'e called out to him once more. Master Fenghan, please wait a moment. Chang'e pulled something out and handed it over with both hands. It was Zhang Fenghan's memorial, in which he had brazenly demanded the emperor lift prohibitions on civil trade of violet gold. Please forgive me, Master Fenghan, for intercepting this memorial without permission instead of submitting it to His Majesty. It's just the two of us here, so I'll speak frankly. Civilian use of violet gold has always been a sore spot for His Majesty. The regulations on trade have not loosened since the reign of Emperor Wu. Consider things from His Majesty's perspective. To him, violet gold is as significant to his authority as the imperial jade seal. If you were His Majesty, could you allow commoners to carve imperial seals out of radishes and sell them for fun? Zhang Fenghan had known the memorial he submitted was a useless endeavor. If it hadn't been returned by the Grand Council, it would have undoubtedly angered the long-gone emperor once again. But the idealistic spirit of the literati was a strong force in him. Regardless of whether or not his advice was followed, he felt compelled to say his piece. Never had he expected Prince Yan, heedless of his own position, to personally seek him out and explain the realities of the situation, much less speak with such candid honesty. Zhang Fenghan's wizened face flushed slightly at Chang'e's sincere words. Your Highness, he sighed. What Your Highness says is reasonable. This old dotard has caused undue trouble for you. I am aware that Master Fenghan is sincerely concerned for the nation and its people. You are the backbone of the Lingshu Institute. Great Liang has seen hard times in recent years, and the responsibility of maintaining all the military's armaments has fallen to you, Chang'e said with a wave of his hand. Protecting you is the least we can do. How can this be considered undue trouble? Zhang Fenghan was at something of a loss. The look in Prince Yan's eyes was as genuine as his tone. It contained none of the nauseating sentimentality that might color such words in the mouth of another. For a moment, Master Feng Han didn't know how to respond and repeated, "My apologies, my apologies," again and again. "Since the day my childhood friend Guchun entered the Lingshu Institute, he's been yakking my ear off about Master Feng Han," Chang'eng quipped amiably. "He's desperate to absorb your every scrap of wisdom, up to and including emulating your habits of drinking whole quay tea and eating pickled radish. The way I see it, he's done everything but buy himself a white-haired wig to wear." This time, Master Feng Han's face really did turn bright red. He wished dearly to drag his freshly accepted disciple Guchun over that instant and slap him silly. What was he doing, spilling all these trivial nothings into the ear of Prince Yan? "Guchun and I grew up together in Yanhui town. Back when we were kids, we were unlucky to be caught in the barbarian invasion. He has no family to speak of, and he has spent all these years following me." Chang'eng paused, seeming rather embarrassed as he glanced at Zhang Fenghan. "I'll stop rambling and come to the point. May I be so bold as to request a favor? Guchun has asked me to tell you, on his behalf, that he always admired Master Fenghan's moral character. He would like to take you as his paternal figure. He wants nothing else but to care for Master Fenghan with all his heart in the future. This is his most fervent wish. What do you think?" Zhang Fenghan's breathing quickened. After returning to the capital with Shen Yi, Guchun had opted to remain and had formally enrolled in the Lingshu Institute. Diligent, clever, and highly gifted, he got on with Zhang Fenghan like a house on fire. In no time at all, the old man had accepted Guchun as his direct disciple. But a disciple was different from a godson. Zhang Fenghan had spent his life uncorrupted by politics. He was possessed of neither power nor influence and had an irascible personality. What possible gain could there be in associating with him? What protection could he provide? Even if there was no one to care for him in his advanced age, save for a couple of old dogs, who would be willing to pay him any mind? Chang'eng watched his expression carefully. I told him ages ago that Master Fenghan prefers peace and quiet. I wouldn't like a chatterbox like him. Please don't feel awkward about this. I'll scold him later on your behalf. That idiot's always been easygoing. You can rest assured he won't take this to heart." "Your Highness, please wait," Zhang Fenghan said in a rush. "Your Highness, this old geezer." In his haste, Zhang Fenghan began to stutter, sweat beading on his forehead. Chang'eng remained silent, a picture of calm amid chaos as he watched Master Fenghan, the corner of his lips quirking up in a smile. That smile was clear and unclouded, like the brilliant grin of a young boy, touched with just the right amount of mischief. It was rare for Zhang Fenghan to see the fourth prince acting anything but experienced and mature. When he recovered his senses, he couldn't help but laugh. "Your Highness is really—" "In that case, I'll let him know. I'm just around the corner up ahead. Take care, Master Fenghan," Chang'eng said briskly. "I'll have Xiao Ge select an auspicious date to come do his kowtows. It looks like it's about to rain. Please take an umbrella with you just in case." Zhang Fenghan, the prickly old thorn who had left Li Feng covered in stinging puncture wounds, bade goodbye to Chang'eng with a beatific smile, gazing after Prince Yan's carriage until it faded into the distance. The moment Chang'eng was out of sight, the skies opened with a light pattering of rain, exactly as the prince had predicted. Zhang Fenghan opened the umbrella that Chang'eng had left him. He felt deeply moved. The past half-year had seen the country devastated by war. Yet despite the turmoil, when he saw these young folks, Master Fenghan felt that the pillar standing indomitably above Great Liang's gilded palace had yet to fall, that there was still this handful of people supporting it. There were indeed many brilliant talents in the world, yet it was often the case that those who were too clever lacked valor and were inclined to put their own safety before matters of principle. Only a truly wise and courageous individual, one who took the lead in lifting the rafter, might gather such talents together. Those who walked at the forefront must doubtless exhaust all their strength and ingenuity, and might not meet a favorable end. Even if their sacrifice wasn't worth it, their life had already been forfeited. But without these great slabs of stone, would not those tens of thousands of grains of sand have long been washed away by the river of time? Zhang Fenghan glanced back and saw the snowy white corner of a monk's robe flash past the end of the alleyway. Schooling his face back to seriousness, he quickly walked over. The restaurant in the alley was nowhere near as grand or impressive as the Kite's Flight Pavilion of times past. It was nothing more than a casual little tea shop, so the shabby and finicky Master Feng Han seemed not the least bit out of place as he stepped inside. He closed his umbrella and shook off the raindrops that clung to its surface. Hearing a light knock on the wooden staircase above, he lifted his head to see Great Master Liao Zhen removing his own dripping wet conical bamboo hat. The monk nodded down at him from the second floor. Master Feng Han caught on immediately and wasted no time ascending the stairs. The two of them entered the innermost private room one after another. A middle-aged man was waiting for them within. He was 40 to 50 years of age with a perfectly ordinary face. His manner of dress wasn't particularly ostentatious, and, at first glance, he had a friendly look about him. Even the corners of his mouth and the tips of his brows were rounded. Had any members of the Ministry of Revenue been present, however, they would have been deeply shocked. This person was none other than the richest man in Jiangnan, Du Wanquan. Du Wanquan had made his fortune in Jiangnan and had once personally organized the merchant fleet to sail west. In all the years since the establishment of maritime trade by Emperor Wu, this man was the one and only business tycoon in all Great Liang to visit the far west. Though the journey was treacherous, he reaped huge profits and became known to the people as the god of wealth upon his return. Later, he relocated his family to the northwest, where he was elected chairman of the Silk Road and Central Plains Chamber of Commerce. In the early days of war, the Marquis of Anding had, for reasons unknown, been punished with a salary deduction and ordered to reflect on his mistakes in the capital, failing to return to his post on time. This sharp-nosed merchant had taken the lead in rallying members of the Chamber of Commerce and evacuating people in groups. Consequently, the ensuing turmoil in the western regions resulted in few civilian casualties. It could be argued that the god of wealth's good instincts were to thank for an extremely timely rescue for the masses. Precisely how much wealth Du Wanquan possessed, no one knew. But they all said he was rich enough to rival the nation. Granted, given Great Liang's current state of impoverishment, rivaling the nation was hardly an extraordinary feat. Yet at present, such a god of wealth was currently huddled in a room with a monk from the National Temple and an old curmudgeon from the Lingshu Institute within a bare-bones little tea shop. Du Wanquan politely rose to his feet at the sight of Zhang Fenghan and offered him the seat of honor. Please come in, he said with cupped hands. It's been over 10 years since we last met, but I can see Master Fenghan hasn't changed a bit. The master is more graceful in bearing than ever. Hardly. Zhang Fenghan politely deflected the compliment. I've grown old. Du Wanquan's expression turned solemn. Before I embarked on this trip to the capital, my wife and children made every effort to dissuade me. They feared that the situation in the capital was still unstable and that the city would become the final resting place of this weary old body. I said to them, Isn't Master Fenghan both older and more capable than me? When the enemy soldiers besieged the capital, he faced them without an inch of steel, upright and fearless. I am but an insignificant businessman. I can scarcely compare to such an unparalleled patriot of the nation. But if I lack even the courage to pay a visit after the fight is over, what kind of coward would that make me? The god of wealth was a longtime veteran of the business world, the living embodiment of the expression, amiability attracts riches. Though distinct in his approach, the impression he left was not unlike that of Prince Yan. With his handful of words, both men had the ability to bring a blush to the listener's face while simultaneously making them feel they had gained something in the encounter. Zhang Fenghan quickly recognized that if they continued exchanging pleasantries like this, they would still be standing here when the sky darkened. He had little choice but to accept the seat of honor. Liao Zhen pressed his palms together in greeting. Du Xiansheng is a very busy man with both family and business to attend to, he signed, while Master Feng Han must hurry back to the Lingshu Institute. Perhaps we can save the small talk for another time. Please forgive this junior for presumptuously overstepping his authority and raising the matter at hand. As he spoke, he drew a string of Buddhist prayer beads from his lapels. The beads came loose with a light tug. Liao Zhen pried open the largest spacer bead and produced an old piece of hollowed-out wood. Its outer surface was rough and unadorned, but inside, it was filled with countless tiny gears lying quietly dormant. Master Feng Han and Du Wanquan shared a glance. Setting the pleasantries aside, they took similar pieces of hollowed wood from their own lapels. When placed together, these three pieces of wood began to slide toward each other on the table, their gears interlocking seamlessly in an instant to form the upper half of a wooden tablet inscribed with the character Lin. It's been 200 years since this tablet was last pieced together, Du Wanquan sighed. At that time, our predecessors entrusted this tablet to the founding ancestor of this dynasty. They chose the best person to lead the country and bartered their service for 200 years of peace and prosperity. Now that this responsibility has passed into the hands of our generation, I hope that we too will make the correct decision. Since Great Master Liao Zhen has gathered the Lin Yuan together today, you must have a candidate in mind. Zhong Lao and the Chun family's representatives are both currently on the front lines and cannot be present at this meeting, Liao Zhen signed. Zhong Lao sent a messenger to bring his piece of the tablet alongside a letter with his recommendations several days ago. As for Miss Chun, she is in a faraway region rife with unrest, so I have yet to receive word. However, I imagine we'll hear from her within the next day or so. Du Wanquan glanced down at the Lin Yuan tablet on the table and straightened in his seat. His expression solemn, he said, "Please, go on, Great Master." Amitabha Buddha. Liao Zhen pressed his palms together and bent his head. Since the outbreak of war, a particular individual has been using the Lin Yuan Pavilion's wooden birds to send dispatches. In doing so, this person has preserved some much-needed room to maneuver for our besieged capital. They have assumed leadership in a time of crisis, eradicated enemies within our own ranks, and guarded the city walls with their own body. They have also defied an imperial decree, refusing the throne. At this point, Zhang Fenghan expressed his approval. I agree with the Great Master regarding this man. Most of my interactions with Prince Yan have been in the imperial court. Although he is young, he possesses both integrity and talent. I am willing to entrust my piece of the tablet to him. It shames me to admit that an old geezer like me, who spent so many years idling away, failed to be of use at the most critical juncture. When I heard the battle report from the front lines, I was completely dumbfounded. Never had I imagined that a Western army could truly lay siege of the capital, nor did it occur to me to use wooden birds for communication. What do you think, Du Xiansheng? The two who had already spoken turned to look at Du Wanquan in unison. Du Wanquan took a moment to mull things over before speaking. Prince Yan is of extremely lofty status, he said diplomatically. Naturally, someone like myself has never met him in person. However, I heard he studied under the venerable Zhong Xiansheng and is close with the Chun family's representative. I'm sure those two know him much better than I do. So why not hear what they have to say first? Liao Zhen produced a wooden bird from his lapels. On the belly of the bird was a finely crafted seal, still unbroken. This is from Zhong Lao, Liao Zhen said. This humble monk has yet to open it. Du Xiansheng, if you please. Du Wanquan rubbed his hands together, rather embarrassed. Don't mind if I do. He carefully broke the seal, opened the bird's belly, and removed the fourth piece of wood. With this, more than half the character for Yuan appeared, leaving only one corner missing. A sheet of billow paper from Zhongchan lay beneath the fragment of tablet. Zhong Lao personally taught Prince Yan how to dispatch troops, organize military formations, and shoot from horseback, Zhang Fenghan said. Such a close master-student relationship cannot be expressed in words. There's no way he'd... Yet as he watched Du Wanquan smooth the billow paper missive from General Zhong Chan over the table, his voice faltered. The note read, "This child has the ability to pacify the nation. However, he suffered an extremely difficult childhood. Although he is benevolent in his youth, there is no guarantee he will remain so past middle age. He is also afflicted with the hidden danger of Wu'er. I advise us to proceed with caution." And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. The first 3 chapters of Arc 9. I only have 3 quick things that I want to talk about. Holy cow! The fact that Guyuan's body is so damaged and rattled, and technically he should still be on bed rest, but he's going back to battle essentially with those injuries sounds completely awful. And having to be put in something that's basically so like skin or body tight that it keeps him in place, that just sounds very unpleasant. The other thing I wanted to say was about page 82 specifically. And I want to talk about it because I said it. I said it. I said it. I said it. Okay, I'm sorry. When Shenyi was talking to Guyuan about Chang'e and his romantic feelings for him, he asked him like, hey, what do you plan on doing about this? But Guyuan was, like trying to avoid the topic essentially. And it said that Shenyi frowned because he definitely understood Guyuan. And basically, if he had no inclinations in that direction, then he would just say it without leaving hints for misinterpretation or ambiguity. Like, what is he going to do? And so he was like, wait, you're seriously thinking about it? I was like, haha, that is exactly what I said in my last video at the end. I was saying, when Guyuan was like making up reasons for him and Chang'e essentially not to be together, it was more so thinking about Chang'e. Like, I don't want him to have to give up this for my sake. In fact, it said directly, for my sake. So that just made me feel really good. And then as far as Guyuan finally finding out about Chang'e's affliction with the Wu'er in the chapter Life History, I really just feel so bad for him because I feel like lately he's just been blaming himself for many things. He blamed himself for Chang'e feeling the way he feels and, not stopping him when the kiss thing happened. And now he's blaming himself for essentially sending Chang'e back to his abuser. But I'm so happy that he has Shenyi there, even if he wasn't listening to Shenyi. Those words may sit in his subconscious where he's like, hey, dude, like, you were so young. There's no way you would have known, unless you literally saw it directly in front of your face. But from what I see, it's not like he spent time with Chang'e, with Xunyang in their presence. So it makes perfect sense that he would not have known. And it's not like Chang'e said anything. And, that just got me thinking a lot of times when we get older, we find out things that we had no clue about and we blame ourselves for those things. And it's really like we need to be gracious with ourselves because the younger we are, the more naive or the less wisdom we have, the less discernment we have. It's not as easy for us to see certain things, So we can't blame ourselves for things, even if we feel bad about knowing that they happened. So I'm glad that he has Shenyi there. I think their friendship is really beautiful, even though they annoy each other all the time. But yeah, other than that, I didn't really want to say anything else. We're just going to go ahead to the next 4 chapters in the next video. So that'll be chapters 71 through 474. Oh my gosh, I cannot speak. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the reading for today. Reading the last chapter, I don't know why, it was just very difficult for me. I had to stop and start several times. The only other thing I want to say is it was really unnerving to hear about the things regarding Chang'e that may have happened, I guess, with this other baby. I don't know. I'm not going to touch that territory. You know what? No, I'm going to leave it alone. I think I need more time to just digest it, so I won't speak on it. I'll see y'all next time. Well, I